$90 million. That's the amount of welfare payments that the Ontario government has had to pay for the illegal border crossing crisis. Today I'm in Winnipeg because Trudeau's immigration minister called a meeting of the provincial immigration ministers in the city today. I came here today to hold him to account and also to call for an emergency meeting of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee because the federal government is committing to a bunch of money without a plan to deal with the illegal border crossing crisis, and it also wasn't adequately budgeted for. The following clips that you're going to see are live press conferences that followed these meetings today. The first clip that I'm going to show you is the immigration minister completely failing to address any questions that the media asked him. Some really bad spin. But then I want you to watch Minister Lisa McLeod. She is the brand new immigration minister in Ontario under the new Premier Doug Ford. Watch her response, and then the following clip is my press conference that I held here today. Some real fireworks happened. This is a big deal in the national news today, but I wanted you to see it live for me. And apologies, the sound quality is a little bit poor because we were having to do this on the fly, but this is clips that you're not going to see in the media tonight. And this is just another example of how Justin Trudeau is failing to manage our immigration system. But more importantly, I wanted you to see the work that Canada's Conservatives are doing to bring Canada's immigration system back to order. Watch now.
Talent, skills, and labor to Canada, how we can work together to make sure we increase the vitality and the numbers of francophone immigrants in Canada. How do we make sure there's a welcoming environment for those communities? In addition to that, we explored further priorities in our Vision Action Plan and making sure that we move ahead and improve on this really great record of collaboration. We will put the table together. We discussed all of those issues.
So I'm here in Winnipeg today listening to this guy. He just met with all of the provincial ministers. And actually, if you notice who's on the stage, Ontario is missing, Saskatchewan is missing. And this is because Justin Trudeau has created an immigration crisis in Canada by not addressing the illegal border crossing crisis. What is really, really remarkable is that a meeting of provincial ministers with the actual federal minister, there's no unity on the stage there. And why? It's because Justin Trudeau is trying to get provinces to absorb the cost of his failures. And what is so exciting to see is that provincial governments are standing up and saying, no, we're not accepting this. I'm listening to this right now, and they're trying to do a few things. They're trying to normalize thousands of people illegally crossing the border. They're trying to normalize hundreds of millions of dollars of your tax dollars being spent without any plan, any accountability to Parliament. Now, I have moved a motion this week to bring back the Citizenship and Immigration Committee for an emergency session in Ottawa on Monday. I came to Winnipeg today to try and meet with some of my provincial counterparts to make sure that they have a voice at this meeting. Now, the Liberal-dominated committee, they're going to have to make the ultimate decision on whether or not we have this study, but I'm here today to try and put coast-to-coast pressure on the Liberals to make sure that we have accountability for these provinces are asking for hundreds of millions of dollars because of the hashtag Welcome to Canada tweet. And what this minister is standing up here, he's standing up and he has no unity from the provinces. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer watch, but I want you to watch the immigration minister. So what's going to happen is he's giving questions to the media right now. Then my understanding is the provincial immigration minister from Ontario under Doug Ford's new government is going to stand up and say, I don't agree with your plan. Then I'm going to go up and rebut some of his falsehoods here. So I'm bringing you this live. You're not going to see this on the news tonight, but have a listen to what I have to get up there and rebut, and I'll try and make sure that you can listen to the Ontario minister now. So listen live.
Due process and appeal rights to asylum claimants.
We had big meeting this week in Winnipeg, call out the government when actually call on the Liberals to rescind the agreement. Why don't you rescind the agreement?
As I said, we abide by the analysis by IRCC.
So the minister was just asked if he would rescind the Safe Third Country Agreement because a senior Liberal was calling upon the government to do that. The interesting thing is he says that he's going to keep the Safe Third Country Agreement alive, but he won't make it apply to the entire border. So he's effectively rendering it moot, and that's a really weak answer.
For provinces and central asylum seekers coming across the border, did you make any tangible investments or promises for investments for Manitoba and for the other provinces in helping settle those?
Generally speaking, as a government, we have settlement committees.
So the minister was just asked, point blank, you spent all this money bringing all of these ministers together today. Are you going to give any more money to the provinces to deal with your illegal border crossing crisis? What you're hearing over my shoulder right now is talking points.
We in direct proportion increase the settlement and integration money that's available to settle and integrate these newcomers who are very critical to growing our economy and meeting our labor market and skill shortages. In terms of irregular migration, I made an announcement weeks ago.
Can you believe that his talking point is that they want to use immigration to meet Canada's labor needs, when in fact all they're doing is allowing the illegal border crossing crisis to continue unchecked? All that does is prevent the world's most vulnerable from entering Canada's asylum system, and it also diverts resources from other processing streams like family reunification or economic streams. The fact is that the government had the audacity to meet with all of these provincial ministers today with no plan to increase resources in the context of a balanced budget.
From the English line, just a reminder for everyone here that when the operator asks the person to pose their question, there may be a slight delay. Operator, can we have the question from the English line, please?
Certainly. As a reminder, you may press star 1 if you have a question. The first question is from McLeod from CTV News. Please go ahead.
Mr. A lot of Canadians who have smoked cannabis products are concerned about their status if they travel to the United States and are asked about their past use. And we're also now hearing about the investors in cannabis.
In case you can't hear, he's being asked about the status of Canadians who want to travel abroad who may have smoked cannabis under the new legislation. I'll bet he doesn't have an answer for this.
You have with your counterparts in the United States about this sort of an immigration and migration issue.
Thank you very much for your question. I think on the issue of cannabis, we're moving ahead, of course, with legalization and strict regulation of cannabis and its products. In terms of access to the United States, all the rules of entry apply to the United States. The United States is a foreign country. They have their own rules and views with respect to cannabis, and I would encourage Canadians to respect those rules as they go into the United States.
In other words, they've given no thought to this issue, and they haven't even started talks with the United States on it.
So I would urge Canadians who are planning to travel to the United States to update themselves on that government's position on cannabis.
Notre prochaine question vient de la ligne francophone. Alors, pour celui celle qui veut poser la question, allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Est-ce qu'il y a une question sur la ligne francophone?
They're asking if there are any French questions.
First question from Manon Cornelier from the Devoir.
Une question en français. But you can answer in English, Mr. Sen. It's concerning the visa system. The Globe and Mail has published no concerning the
So the question that's being asked right now is about the level of visa applications that are being approved from countries such as Venezuela. I've had members of communities, specifically the Venezuelan community, come to my office in recent months and say that even for people that have had long-term track records of going back to their country afterward, that the government is actually decreasing the amount of visas that are applied. So what's happening here is that the government under Justin Trudeau is actually lifting visas from countries like Mexico and Romania without a plan. We're seeing increased numbers of false asylum claims from these countries. And now what they're doing is clamping down on visas that are legitimate from other countries like Venezuela. And you'll listen, he doesn't have an answer on this. This was a story that we worked on with the Globe and Mail earlier this week, and he's having to answer for it.
Over 80%, so we do actually approve more visas than we reject. Having said that, we do reject some applicants because visa officers have to make a judgment call based on criteria.
You'll notice he has no answer on this. He has absolutely no answer on this, especially since it's quantifiable by the statistics that are coming in. And this is, you don't have to take my word on it. The Globe and Mail actually reported on this earlier this week. He has no plan on this, the same way he has no plan for illegal border crossing.
We why I've traveled to Africa and the Middle East to visit our particular visa offices there to see the challenges, the particular challenges they face, but also how we can improve our processing times. I'll give you an example. When last our visa processing time.
He's talking about increased processing times. The only processing time that this government has increased is for people illegally crossing the border, and that processing time is 0 days. There are people who have applications to come in as privately sponsored refugees who are waiting for 7.5 years to come to Canada legally.
And continue to bring the global outreach.
So we are going to take a question.
Discrimination aspect that people are seeing there, because if you're able to treat 50% of the people in
case you can't hear this, the mainstream media is actually calling them out on discrimination for visa rejections from different countries.
As I said, visa decisions are made by trained immigration officers. When there are very high refusal rates, we work with those countries and with the visa offices to make sure that sometimes it's a question of incomplete applications or a little bit more outreach to educate foreign nationals from that region what they need to do to have a successful application. And we've done that with some of these offices.
I don't know if you can hear this, but this guy just has no responses to these questions at all because they have no plan on bringing Canada's immigration system back to order.
So Global News just published a piece, an online piece in a television story a couple days ago about a Sudanese girl who's 9 years old.
He's now being asked about a Sudanese girl who might be taken out of Canada to have female genital mutilation performed on her. And you'll remember this minister's track record on the topic of female genital mutilation. It took us months to get him to acknowledge that female genital mutilation should be listed as a terrible practice that shouldn't be supported and is illegal in Canada and Canada's citizenship. In fact, over 50,000 of you signed the petition that forced us, that allowed me to help force him to do so. His talking points on this right now, if you could listen to this, are disgusting.
Able to sponsor their parents through the immigration system actually can place them in vulnerable situations, can place them in situations where they're at the risk of trafficking and other violations. Our analysis will always be based on...
Here's the other thing on female genital mutilation. Months ago, I stood in front of the Ottawa Press Gallery in Parliament and asked this government to come up with a strategy to ensure that vulnerable girls in Canada were not being taken abroad to have female genital mutilation practiced on them. I also asked them to come up with a plan to ensure that practitioners of female genital mutilation were not allowed into Canada. There's been no action from this government on this file, and today he doesn't have any answers for this reporter on this topic.
Reuniting families at the same time, when it comes to children, we have to be very careful at how we approach that issue.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, you said that this is policies in place to protect children from exploitation. You told Global News in the past, also said in 2006, court documents, there's no evidence of that.
There is reason to believe that if children are encouraged to come to Canada as child refugees without their parents, that could encourage them to be exposed to trafficking in vulnerable situations, because then as a whole...
Can you believe this? I have to come to Winnipeg to hold this guy to account in the middle of the summer because of these answers. It's crazy. Justin Trudeau has failed so badly on the immigration file.
We're going to go to the phone now for, I believe that there's a reporter queued up on the phone to ask a question. So operator, if you could please let that person go ahead.
Certainly. The next question is from Annabelle Apparently from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Why do you think the numbers of border crossings are down?
Number of reasons. We've had a very aggressive outreach.
So the government right now, through Trudeau's immigration minister, is trying to say that the numbers of illegal border crossers are down, and they are by a couple of hundred. But the reality is that there's still about 2,000 plus people crossing the border illegally into Canada every year. And what the minister is doing right now is trying to, through the media, normalize to you, make it normal, that 2,000 plus people illegally crossing the border from the United States of America and claiming asylum subsequently is something that's normal, that we should just accept. Like, it's actually a success that it's down from whatever the number was, 4,000, 5,000 a month. I don't accept that, and I don't think you do either.
And I think that has had a big impact. In addition to that, we've been working very closely with the U.S. government to work with them to feed them our information with respect to the trends that we were seeing with asylum seekers, so that they could take that information and feed it into their visa issuing regime. As you know, many of the asylum seekers were in valid possession.
All of this could have been addressed over a year ago if the government had taken legislative action to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, which is what the Conservative Party of Canada has been asking for 18 months.
More than 80 a day crossing the border irregularly. In June, in May it came down to about 50 a day, and then in June it came down to about 30.
Did you hear that? He's actually celebrating the fact that we're at 50 a day. Like, that's something that we should be celebrating. Like, that's great, that's normal. 50 people illegally crossing the border from the United States into Canada is something that we should be celebrating and proud of. The number should be 0.
That you're encouraging the U.S. to crack down on potentially vulnerable migrants?
No, we are saying to people that cross, that there are avenues in which you can claim asylum in Canada, either through a port of entry, an official port of entry. You can also, there are avenues to claim asylum or go through the refugee system abroad, through the UNHCR, through our embassies and so on. So we're not discouraging that. What we're saying is, we do not, of course we work very closely with the United States, and we do not encourage irregular migration.
We're going to take one last question today from the floor, from CBC.
So the minister just says he's not encouraging illegal migration, yet he set up a refugee camp at the U.S.-Canada border. He has directed resources to expediting work permits for people who are illegally crossing the border and claiming asylum. And he's doing nothing to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. That sounds like encouragement to me.
Between Canada and Ontario is being challenged by the new government. And as you can see, Minister McLeod is there. She's not joining us at this podium.
The minister's currently taking a swipe at Lisa McLeod, Doug Ford's new immigration minister in Ontario. He's trying to make it somehow bad that she's standing up for her province and saying that she's not accepting the hundreds of millions of dollars of just completely unbudgeted funding that they're being required to spend because Ontario is, because of the illegal border crossing crisis. I'm really proud of the fact that there are provincial ministers who are not standing on that stage right now and saying that this is unacceptable, Lisa McLeod being one of them.
Employers in Ontario, as well as all the provinces and territories that are represented here. So we talked about all those issues, but unfortunately Ontario has chosen to step to the table.
Unfortunately, Ontario has chosen to step away from the table. Good on them. We need to have this meeting in Ottawa that I'm pushing for, because this is not budgeted. This is not a prudent, way to budget for your tax dollars. The reality is the government has no idea about how many people are going to continue to illegally cross the border and claim asylum. They have no plan to house them. They have no plan to process them over time. The IRB, the Immigration Refugee Board, is in disarray, and they want you to accept this as normal. And for once, we've got a government in Ontario that is standing up to this tax and spend Liberal government of Justin Trudeau.
But make no mistake, this would be easier if provinces work with us to address this issue. On the issue of the dormitories and the folks that it's no longer able.
Did you hear that? He just said it would be easier if provinces worked with the Liberal governments to just pretend like everything is fine, everything's okay. Let's bus people to homeless shelters across Ontario, which is what their plan is. You can't play a shell game with human beings' lives, and that's what Justin Trudeau and this minister wants. They want you to spend hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars instead of closing the loophole in Safe Third Country Agreement, instead of prioritizing the world's most vulnerable in our asylum system. That's ridiculous. And the fact is, he's trying to pin the blame on the Ontario government. And right now, he's talking about the terminology of illegal border crossing, right? He wants, what the Liberal government wants is us to have a semantic argument over illegal or irregular. But when the reality is there are hundreds of people that are going to be taken out of out of universities And he's calling this fear-mongering. Did you just hear that? What we're trying to do is ensure that these people have, now that they're here, they're not sleeping on the streets. We need to have a plan to take care of this, and we need to stop the demand on the system by closing the loophole on the Safe Third Country Agreement. I'm going to speak to this in my press conference later.
We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Once someone is on Canadian soil and claims asylum, we have an obligation domestically and internationally to grant them a fair hearing. If they have a legitimate refugee claim, which is determined by an independent immigration refugee board, they get to stay and they get our protection. If they don't have a legitimate refugee claim, they get to be removed. That's our law. What Ontario is doing is they're taking this issue and they're very low. On some days we have only 14 people.
So now he's blaming this on Doug Ford. Doug Ford has been in office for what, like 5 days? And he just said demonizing. Doug Ford is demonizing people. Well, I would argue that having no plan to deal with people who are in homeless shelters in Ontario and then having to put them on buses to parts unknown is perhaps a more damaging approach. You know, Justin Trudeau, when he tweeted #welcome to Canada with no plan, or all these declarations of sanctuary cities, what did he think was going to happen? Of course people are going to come to Canada. It's irresponsible, the fact that he just called Lisa McLeod and Doug Ford fearmongers for standing up for the rights of people who are in their province. It's ridiculous. This is Julia. She traveled with me today to Winnipeg to help set up this press conference. And now Lisa McLeod, the woman that he just demonized in, Justin Trudeau's feminist cabinet, is about to stand up for Ontario. Let's listen live.
Just give us 1 second. Yeah.
Excuse me. Can you turn the mic down?
I think they're actually trying to stop Lisa from talking right now.
It's on?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys ready? Okay. Just signal when you're ready.
This is Lisa McLeod, the newly minted immigration minister in Ontario.
You're all set? My name is Lisa McLeod. I am the newly appointed Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, and Women with responsibility for immigration in the province of Ontario. Ontario is a welcoming society. Earlier today, I entered this first federal provincial territorial meeting as the Minister responsible for immigration in the province of Ontario with a great deal of hope. I raised issues of supporting the Syrian refugees that came into our province, in particular into my home city of Ottawa. I talked about the need to integrate economic immigrants across Ontario, including into rural Ontario. I talked about international students. When I challenged the Minister of Federal Immigration on some of the issues we're confronting in Ottawa, the exchange became testy, and I chose to leave the meeting, and here is why. In the city of Toronto alone, we have over 2,400 people that are in temporary shelters. That is surpassing what the capacity is for the city of Toronto. We know that that is a $74 million bill. My city of Ottawa, our mayor has indicated that our shelter capacity is also over capacity, and therefore they are requiring about $11 million to deal with that. As the minister responsible for Ontario Works, which is our welfare system, I have inquired into what this has had an impact on our welfare rolls. Presently, for all refugee claimants, we are supporting them with $328 million. Of that, $90 million, we believe, can be attributed to those who have crossed the border illegally. I'm not going to get into a debate on semantics with the minister, but I did request that he take into consideration these exorbitant costs, which you can can tell is about $175 million on top of the $3 million that Ontario provided to the Red Cross, in addition to the 800 beds in 2 college dormitories inside the City of Toronto, which, by the way, must be vacated by August the 9th because we do have students returning to school in the fall. I was expecting that we would be able to collaborate on that. Instead, what I saw here today was an attempt to talk, him calling me un-Canadian, which I take great offense to, and I do hope he will apologize and reconsider his language. I also won't into accepting what the federal government is doing because we do have severe and significant challenges inside the province of Ontario. So with that, I was very clear that we would not sign the communique, that there is a problem at the border. The border must be enforced, and that Ontario should be made whole for all of the costs that we have incurred. And in addition to that, I would just like to point out that the federal government has only promised us $11 million, and that has yet to flow. So again, that is insufficient, inadequate, and I'm calling on the federal government to reconsider. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
$90 million in welfare payments for illegal border crossers is what Lisa just announced in Ontario alone.
This is a very big issue of $90 million. We do have we have a looming crisis in terms of housing. I simply wanted to do that, but the minister decided he would engage in rhetoric, call me and other conservatives names. This isn't about a conservative. It's not about being liberal or New Democrat or Green. It's about making sure that the supports that we have in the province of Ontario aren't at capacity and that we are made whole for the costs that we are incurring. And we're happy to work in a partnership if they're happy to work with us, but that was not the case. And I think everybody would see how in the last question that the Minister of Immigration federally had, his answer was directed at me to try and intimidate me, and I will not be intimidated. I have a large provincial ministry to run that includes children with autism, it includes children in care, it includes women fleeing domestic violence, it includes human trafficking. And it keeps me up at night when I think about the resources that I have to expend elsewhere, and I can't help those people as well. So I'm simply asking them to fix the problems that they have created with their federal policies.
There's a difference from Kathleen Wynne's government.
Your government is new.
2 weeks ago, I got appointed to cabinet.
And yet you feel so passionately about this.
This reporter is asking her if her comments are valid because she's a new minister.
It's a good question because I ended up, as you know, the previous administration in Ontario had 31 cabinet ministers. That was, we made a decision to have 21 ministries. Of that, there used to be 5 ministers responsible for the 1 ministry that I have. So I spent the Canada Day weekend reading and doing briefings thanks to my very able Deputy Janet Menard. I was fully briefed on a number of these issues, including income supports, autism and domestic abuse, and all of the programs that my ministry, which is the heart of our government, supports. In addition, I found out I was also the minister responsible for immigration, and I saw that there were certain challenges that Ontario was facing and certain financial pressures that we're facing as a result of the decisions by the Trudeau government.
What do you think about the current situation beside the situation going on in the dorms? And are you involved at all?
She's being asked about
One of my first meetings,
the homeless shelter capacity.
As well as the Quebec Immigration Minister to talk about the situation. I provided him with a list at that time of the federal assets and resources in Toronto so that they may be able to help with those accommodations, because I can't reiterate enough. Those spaces, those 800 spaces, will need to be vacated by August the 9th in order for university or college students across the City of Toronto to go back, and across Ontario to go back to school. So we have a looming crisis in that sense. I also have a very large fiscal bill that the minister doesn't seem to want to support us with. You know, he has said that he has $50 million. I've just outlined $175 million in needs right there, and that's critical. In addition, I left because we were starting to talk about the strength of our immigration system and the integrity of our immigration system. But it was clear he wasn't about to address any of those concerns that I had with respect to 60-day turnaround time for a
That
claimant.
minister doesn't want to talk about anything because they're failing.
Come and if they're sent back, we'll have been on the social assistance rolls in the province of Ontario for that period of time. So he didn't seem to want to move on any of that, and so that's why I left. If you don't want to actually address the critical issues that we're facing right now with the immigration system, then how can you talk about the confidence the public, and in my case, the public of Ontario, are going to have with his system?
What do you think of the minister's comments about Ontario being plans of asylum seekers, talking about fear-mongering language, points that...
The media is actually asking her if she's fear-mongering right now. That's the question that's being asked.
Well, look, I thought his comments were very divisive. I thought his comments were actually mean-spirited toward me personally, and I didn't appreciate that. I have done a lot of work in my community with refugees and with the newcomers, and it's something that we fully support in the province of Ontario. I think that his rhetoric is unhelpful, and he wants to avoid actually writing me a check for $175 million is what I got out of that.
That's the total amount of cash.
That's what we're looking at. So again, just to reiterate, John Tory told our administration it was $75 million. Mayor Watson of the City of Ottawa, where I live, told me it was $11 million. In addition, of the $328 that our government supports.
Keep in mind, the Trudeau government is running billions of dollars of deficits, cutting benefits to people who need it the most, and raising your taxes.
And who could eventually be turned away. So nobody is saying any of those things. I think maybe the minister should sit down, have a nice cup of tea, calm down a little bit, and maybe phone me and apologize for calling me un-Canadian. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be right back. I'm going up to do my press conference. Working hard for you in Winnipeg. Have a great day. Sure. So the responsibility of the Prime Minister of Canada is to maintain a planned, orderly immigration system. When it comes to humanitarian immigration, that means ensuring that we are adequately projecting the number of people that are entering Canada to claim asylum, that we are ensuring that we have robust and strong processes that process claims quickly, and that we also have adequate budgetary resources put in place for integration. And that includes things like social program support and ensuring that people do have timely access to processing. What we've seen in the last 18 months in Canada is a complete breakdown of that system in Canada. When the Prime Minister tweeted out #Welcome to Canada after the American administration made changes to their immigration system, you know, what did he think was going to happen? Of course people are going to come. Since then, I don't understand what the federal government's plan is on this. So they're saying that the Safe Third Country Agreement should apply, but only to official points of entry. They have done nothing to extend the agreement across the entire border, which would have reduced demand on the system. But the reality is, as we're seeing with the discussion happening today, is that we have yet another example of Justin Trudeau failing to maintain, you know, the spirit of functioning national federal system in Canada. The fact that we just had to see a provincial minister come up and say that a federal immigration minister has paid lip service and denigrated her instead of trying to come up with solutions to dealing with people's lives is, I think, shameful, and I think is another example of this pattern with Justin Trudeau in this country. Here's the reality. There are hundreds of people who are about to be evicted from their homes, essentially in Toronto, in the next 3 weeks. You have a provincial minister here who says, what is the plan? What is the response to this? And you know what? What I find also very disappointing is the fact that the federal minister has tried to normalize the number of people continuing to illegally cross the border and claim asylum from the United States. The reality is that we're still seeing thousands of people cross the border monthly. That number should be zero, especially with the Safe Third Country Agreement, if it was enforced across the entire border. I have to tell you, I actually sympathize with Minister McLeod's sentiments. When I listen to the federal immigration minister denigrate into rhetoric and calling names, that to me is it's sort of this last mark of a minister who thinks maybe he's going to get shuffled next week because he's done such a poor job at managing the political, or at the situation at Roxham Road. The federal Conservatives have called for an emergency meeting of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee to look at specifically the budgetary amounts that are being requested by provinces to deal with the illegal border crossing crisis, as was mentioned. I was shocked to learn that $90 million of Ontario taxpayer dollars have been allocated to welfare payments for illegal border crossers. What is the federal government's role in that? Why hasn't the federal government stepped in to deal with this crisis? So the other thing is, from a technical perspective, the federal minister has not put these estimates at all into the federal budgetary process. These are additional amounts that are going to keep increasing across the country. And as a parliamentarian who is supposed to exercise a fiduciary responsibility to review taxpayer dollars, I haven't had the opportunity to do that, nor have my colleagues. This minister has to come back to Ottawa and has to give account for how he's going to pay for these requirements, at the very least.
What do you think
I would also like to give my provincial counterparts an opportunity to speak in a parliamentary committee instead of having to be forced out of a private meeting that this minister can't manage. For that reason, I expect the Liberal members on the Citizenship and Immigration Committee to allow for this examination to happen through an emergency meeting this summer.
What do you think should happen with the Safe Third Country Agreement?
There is absolutely no question what should happen with the Safe Third Country Agreement. The Prime Minister himself, Justin Trudeau, stood up in the House of Commons and said that the criteria that was negotiated into the Safe Third Country Agreement to monitor whether or not the United States remains a Safe Third Country Agreement applies. And he said that the United States is a Safe Third Country Agreement. But by not extending that agreement to the entire border, he has rendered it moot. And in fact, he's created an air of permanence to what is happening at the Roxham Road crisis. We have a refugee camp set up there, permanent tents. We have RCMP who have been directed there permanently. We have permanent processing stations. For all intents and purposes, this is a permanent processing station. But what have they done? Instead of dealing with a long-term plan or coming up with a long-term plan on how to deal with the fact that these are people's lives that are having an impact on provincial social programs, we see absolutely no plans, and we see the minister coming out and calling provincial immigration ministers un-Canadian and fear-mongering for asking basic questions about how these people's lives are supposed to be managed. Now, I have been in this for the last 18 months. We have suggested as a Conservative Party numerous legislative mechanisms by which the government could have extended the Safe Third Country Agreement across the entire border. And now what we're seeing is the rotten fruit being reaped by this government by the fact that there are hundreds of millions of dollars with no plan and people's lives at stake. I am just so remarkably frustrated that I felt the need to come out to Winnipeg to say this today. This minister can't even manage a basic meeting with his provincial counterparts. And to me, that says that the entire Canadian immigration system is completely off the rails.
You said the immigration problem is going to grow. Do you think the division between the provincial and the federal, or some provinces and the federal government, will grow as well?
Okay, but it's not just this, right? I mean, I am an Alberta MP. I have just watched Alberta and British Columbia get into a trade war because of the Prime Minister's inability to enforce federal jurisdiction over natural resource development. And now today, I've watched the Prime Minister and a completely ineffectual minister who, again, I would put on the cabinet shuffle list, to be quite frank, completely being unable to manage a basic meeting of his provincial counterparts here today. That is not undertaking the job of the Prime Minister of Canada. That is abdicating your responsibility. Now, the Prime Minister has yet to take responsibility for #Welcome to Canada. The reality is that people came when he issued that call, and he has absolutely no plan to manage people's lives. This isn't something that is new. This is something that we've dealt with in motions in the House of Commons, in committee study. I don't know how many media scrums I've had. I don't know how many motions I've put forward. There is no budgetary plan. There is no long-term estimates. I don't even understand the assumptions under which we're operating. Minister McLeod, I think, was just giving the current state snapshot of the costs that her provinces have undertaken. The same thing with the provincial government of Quebec. Why has this Prime Minister and this minister not said, look, if we are going to increase the number of asylum claimants from the United States to this level, here's the plan. Here's the billions of dollars that it's going to take us over many years
to sort this issue out. Everything from people having to wait for years to have their asylum claim processed to the impact on welfare systems in provinces. There is no plan to deal with this. And you know what? To refute the minister's denigrating comment that it's somehow un-Canadian to ask these questions, I would argue the exact opposite. I want to see a compassionate asylum claim system managed that prioritizes the world's most vulnerable. I don't want to have to see asylum claimants be put on buses and bused to parts unknown in Ontario because the homeless shelter capacity is oversubscribed in Toronto. That is not compassionate. Canadians expect us to return to planned and orderly immigration system, and they expect us to manage the system with compassion. And that means having a plan. We will be in Ottawa on Monday. We will be demanding an emergency session of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, and I expect the minister to be there to answer my questions after that meeting.